When Celebration saw its first residents move into town during the summer of 1996, everything seemed great. The town center was beautiful, the houses looked idyllic, the streets cozy and inviting. It was figuratively a Main Street USA that you could actually live in. However, it wouldn't be long before the flaws and troubles of the town began to surface and it would start to receive criticism from the outside. What was meant to be a perfect town was apparently not so perfect.
When it was first announced demand to live here was so high, Disney ran a lottery. Bill and Susan Bona were among the first 400 winners.
I think people came here because thinking they were going to be living on Main Street, USA, and, the pixie dust would be sprinkled and their life would be perfect. And they wanted the monorail to pick them up at their front door. And, this is real life, real mortgages, real jobs.
While many residents of the brand new town were quick to praise the sense of community that the neo-traditionalist design aimed to foster, they were also quick to highlight a pretty glaring flaw, which is that the houses, well, they kind of sucked. Back in its initial stages, Disney opted to use contractors to build the homes of Celebration rather than building the houses themselves. It would hurt their bottom line since they had to pay the third-party companies to do the building, but the benefit was that they wouldn't have to manage the logistics of constructing thousands of homes over the decade or so they expected it would take to complete the town. So they reached out to a number of different companies who specialized in home construction and put them to work as fast as they could. And while that speedy construction would prove helpful in the growth of Celebration, it would ultimately hurt the homes themselves. Problems with the houses began to spring up, and they ranged from small issues like outlets not working to major ones like leaking roofs and moldy walls. Many residents found themselves requesting repair after repair.
People of some countries have an ideology about buying or renting a house which says don't buy a house from its seller but from its neighbors. At first, other people might have problems to understand it, but in fact, decision of customers can be changed according to this saying. Agencies or private sellers can easily seduce people who want to buy a house in a way that, in the end, a buyer could have been succeed. So the best way for customers to avoid being deceived is to ask a neighbor. In that case, people can have more information that concerns a house itself and its neighborhood. So that's why we decided to ask to neighbors and residents that live in Celebration.
One of the criticisms that's laid upon Celebration is that it's a town of rules, and that these rules are somehow not only unreasonable but burdensome. So some people who are critical of the town say, do you know that when a person buys a house here, they have to sign documents that are contained in a 2.5-inch binder? Are you kidding me? Look at all this stuff. This is Disney, Disney's great, but they overdo some things.
They will come by and inspect your house on a yearly or a few times a year, and they'll tell you, your mailbox is faded, you need to repaint it. It sounds crazy, but when people drive in here, that's the wow factor. Everything is so, everything's so perfect, and I understand. I get a letter in the mail and someone tells me to paint my mailbox. I'm not happy about it. I'm just like, this is ridiculous. There's so many more important things about running a community than me painting my mailbox. This is ridiculous. Times are tough right now, so times are tough, and people don't necessarily have the money to throw to a maintenance guy and fix, 10 or 20 things on their house every year.
One of the things that people, when they first came in here into the bubble, they thought that, you were free from crime and that bad things wouldn't happen. And bad things have always happened, no different than any place else. We are not immune from it. Drug deals happen in Celebration. Violent crime happens in Celebration.
Celebration is a small, family-oriented community that was planned and developed by Disney in 1994. With its charming sights and sounds, it would be one of the last places many would imagine crime.
Disney tends to be a high-profile company. They're a much admired company, but when something happens bad at Disney, it makes news. Disney's business premise is this is a place to escape. So when something happens that's kind of typical of what happens anywhere else, it makes news. And that's why it was newsworthy here. And unfortunately, I think tended to get blown out of proportion simply because it was unusual for this town, not for American life, for this town.
In the town that Disney built, another violent death in less than a week. The owner of a failed security firm barricades himself inside his home, the home soon to be foreclosed, shooting at deputies, then killing himself. The 14-hour standoff came days after the town's first homicide.
Change who we were and the scope of who the people were. So when you heard the interviews, you heard people say the same thing. We are who we've always been, and we're just a part of the population, and this happens everywhere.
They put up a fake ice rink, for crying out loud. Yeah, so you can go ice skating.
You know, when looking at children rolling around in this snope, they call it snope. Snow soap something. And I'm watching them roll around, and I'm like, please don't come into my store.
The term New Urbanism is important for the Celebration project because it is a similar project to Seaside, Florida, which is one of the 3 pioneers of this movement. You can remember Seaside, Florida from the movie Truman Show because it was the neighborhood that filmed in it.
Good morning! Morning! Good morning! Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Most of the intellectuals seem to be so offended at the idea of celebration, but what was the reason of it? The fact that Disney is behind Celebration is Disney has always sold fantasy, the ideal life that described as small town with houses with front porches and white fences. This type of parts creates segregation among community. Houses with white fences seems classy, but it's the main element in the society's mind that creates the caste system, studies of hierarchy or class distinctions.
In our opinion, the problem is overrated advertisements that capitalism had brought. If you think about those issues in general, they are not catastrophic, but Celebration is a way from the ideology to be utopic and ideal. Taking behind the name of Disney, Celebration set high prices to make people think that there is something related with Disney and it's a different world. But anyway, in fact, everyone can live with those problems, but the idea of paying a big amount of money for a house there has to be rethought 1,000 times but accepted once.
When Disney was developing the vision for this town and when they were developing the marketing for this town, they created a story. Everybody who comes to Celebration didn't live here before because the town wasn't here. So how do you provide a story, a heritage, if you will? And so they created a story. And when they went to communicate that story, that heritage, they wrote a number of things that were in their publicity materials, and I'd like to read one to you. There once was a place where neighbors greeted neighbors in the quiet of summer twilight, where children chased fireflies, and porch swings provided refuge from the cares of the day. The movie house showed cartoons on Saturday, and there was one teacher who always knew you and had a special something they thought you had. Remember that place? Perhaps from your childhood, or maybe just from stories. It held a magic all its own, the special magic of an American hometown. Isn't that cool?